Joining us now from the Pakistani capital is journalist and political analyst Javed Rana. Javed, let's start by discussing the Pakistani Prime Minister's visit to Istanbul. He met Turkish President Erdogan. The Pakistani Army Chief was also accompanying him. What's the latest, Javed? What was discussed more during this meeting?
I think in a broader context, Pakistan's Prime Minister and top officials have been touring the regional countries. And it wants to tell the world, more particularly with the focus to India, that Pakistan is thanking to its regional partners. And that is in a broader context because of the fact that India is not only the war it has lost against Pakistan, it has also lost its public diplomacy, its so-called narrative on terrorism. I think Pakistan in that broader context is showcasing that, telling the India that it has partners, it has the friends in the region who supported its war against New Delhi. That is one part of it, and I think and also given the fact that there is a strong relationship between Turkey and Pakistan in terms of defense cooperation, in terms of the expansion of the trade, I think that is also we have to see it in that context. Pakistan and Turkey, they are basically aiming to enhance their trade from $1.5 billion US to $5 billion US in next couple of years. That is the one aim. But again, we have to see again the defense cooperation. That is far more important than those of the trade cooperation. And that is where both Pakistan and Turkey have been cooperating in manufacturing the warships, and also upgrading, particularly in case of Pakistan, Turkey has been helping out Pakistan in upgrading its fighter jets, the F-16, which Pakistan long ago had got from the USA. And that's just tip of the iceberg of the scale of the cooperation, because so far as the drone technology, where Turkey has made a lot of innovation, and that is where both countries are sharing their expertise. And also, you cannot ignore the role of the Turkey's drones in Pakistan's war against India. I think it was a kind of a battle between the drones manufactured by the Turkey and the drones manufactured by the apartheid cruel state of Israel. So Israeli drones were beaten up because Pakistan, I think 98% of those drones were shot down, and some of them by the common Pakistani peoples. They were firing at it. So I think that was for Pakistani people, it was a kind of entertainment when they were shooting down those Israeli drones. So again, this is going to be focus that how Pakistan and Turkey can further expand their ties. That is a broader context of the cooperation between two countries. But again, now since Pakistan has become a kind of a case for the world, where a country which was underestimated in terms of its conventional capability, it has beaten another country, a regional country, India, which perceives itself as one of the biggest so-called military power and economic power. And then there was a new use of technology, like we have been hearing about dogfights between fighter jets. Now the very concept of the dogfight has been changed, and it has been tested in air battles between India and Pakistan. Pakistani fighter jets were shooting down Indian fighter jets by staying within its own territory, and that is something new happening in terms of the jamming signals of the other fighter jets, but through cyber attacks. I mean, this is a completely new usage of the technology, and therefore Pakistan's fighter jets, Pakistan's pilots now have become a case study for the world. How come they jam a far advanced fighter jets known as Rifles, and by staying in its own in its own territory, and Pakistan has established its aerial superiority. So again, after World War II, this was the biggest dogfight. But again, the concept of the dogfight has changed, where a country is keeping its planes in its own air and shooting down its rivals' planes, and that is why India had to abandon its air bases from all its of the neighboring region up to 400 kilometers, and that is something new which was happening, and certainly the cooperation of the China is extremely important in this particular case.
Javed, we're talking about bilateral ties, right? We're talking about trade. We're talking about strengthening those ties, those historic ties between Pakistan and Turkey. So before those military strikes happened, or, some people call it war, some people call it operational strikes between India and Pakistan. So before that happened, Turkey and India had great ties. They still do. But the sentiment, the anti-Turkey sentiment, has grown in India. So what are you thinking? What's your analysis of the sentiment that is in New Delhi right now? How is New Delhi looking at this latest visit from the Pakistani Prime Minister?
I think, again, New Delhi would not be happy over the visit of the Pakistani Prime Minister. And New Delhi, now, all the vibes that coming from the New Delhi suggest that their tourists are not going to visit Turkey. Their tourists not going to visit Azerbaijan, because these are the countries which provided all kind of weaponry support and all kind of whatever they could have done. They did it behind the scene. This is not going to work. I think the common people in India now understanding the tactics of a RSS government, extremist, fanatical government, just were not very different to the apartheid state government. Those tactics are not working. Not all over the world, its approach towards terrorism is not working, because the people in the world are not taking that Pakistan is conducting terrorism in Kashmir, because they see in a different context. Kashmir is an internationally disputed territory where there are numerous UN Security Council resolutions under which there has to be plebiscite, which India has been refusing, and calling it, whenever there is some resistance, sometime unfortunately civilians are killed, then it calls it a terrorism. And also in a broader context, we have to see that the West is losing interest in this so-called terrorism narrative, because it has gone out of Afghanistan, where it was beaten up, and in a similar fashion, the bigger theater in the Middle East of USA against so-called ISIS, that has also been winded down. Turkey's the campaign against PKK terrorists has been also winded down, and I think that is also an indicator that the world is not interested in a fake terrorism narrative, and also particularly at a time when the apartheid state has misused this so-called narrative of terrorism against Hamas. It has killed 60,000 people and maimed and injured over 120,000 people in the occupied Gaza. So people are not taking it very seriously. I think now even Indian officials are their parliamentarians are visiting the United States and the other Western countries, telling them that there is a threat of terrorism. So I think in that context, the very question that you asked, the world is going to look at a broader perspective, and the people inside India, they are not very happy with their own government, because they have been beaten up in the war. I'm using the word of the war because it has a context, and there is a difference of opinion given the fact that it was a very short, but the scale of which the risk involved in it was a huge. I think at a scale at which Pakistan destroyed India's military infrastructure, that was more than what happened in 1971's war. So many people in Pakistan, I think, prefer to use the term of a war instead of using the terminology of a brief confrontation or some kind of a border tension.
Javed, the two leaders, they also discussed Gaza and the current humanitarian situation that is in Gaza right now. 2.3 million people without access to basic aid, basic needs. And then Netanyahu has just said that Israel is going to control over 75% of the occupied Gaza Strip. So how are you looking at the latest situation? And we also saw last week that Israel struck a house where 7 children from the same family were killed. 7 or 9, I believe it's 9 children. 9 children were killed from the same family. So how are you looking at this? Journalists have also been killed now. More than 220 journalists have been killed. Israel's not stopping with the bombing. How are you looking at the situation?
Well, Israeli military from ground, from air, they are bombing, killing people. And I think the bigger issue along with this is also the people are being starved to death. And you may recall that just recently, the so-called head of the NGO, who was backed by the Israel and the USA, to drop a very limited aid, which is maybe a little more than 100 trucks, because Israel was not trusting the UN, the independent body, because it thought it was a compromising and providing the food aid to also to Hamas. I think even the head of that NGO has resigned over the discrimination, over the very limited scale of this aid being distributed to the people. And then more importantly, then there is also selection where this distribution can take place and where it cannot. So I think he was not willing to work with Israel. Their own men were not willing to work with Israel at a time when the West is now begins to deserting Israel. So I think we have to see that now the tragedy of the Palestinian seems to become a kind of a liability for the West, Western aid agencies, the United Nations, obviously, because United Nations itself has been the victim of the very negative propaganda, and that in that context, what is not happening is that no one is willing to do anything meaningful which can deter Israel, which can stop Israel's aggression in occupied Gaza. That is not happening. My understanding is, I've been saying it for last 1.5 years, unless there is a genuine military deterrence, Israel would not stop this aggression, or if the Americans, they change their policy, none of which is happening. So therefore, we will continue to see this genocide in days and weeks and months to come if these two conditions are not fulfilled.
Javed, if I may add to what you said, now Israel has a new plan. It's saying that we'll have mercenary groups who will distribute aid in cooperation with the United States, because they've been saying whatever aid that's been dropped into Gaza, Hamas has been stealing that aid. But it's not Hamas. There are other armed groups inside Gaza who have been stealing that aid. So what do you think about this plan? Even the United Nations has rejected this plan, right? Because it says this is another way of Israel administering the humanitarian aid. So what do you think about this new plan that Israel has proposed?
I think we have to see what Israeli officials and their top political leaders have been saying. They've been saying it that the aid is being used as a weapons of war, basically forcing people to turn against Hamas and other jihadi group. That is a part of it, forcing people to expel themselves from Gaza, leave Gaza. They have set up their desk to facilitate people to leave Gaza. That is a broader context. That is not working. Nonetheless, it is not working. I think now all these kind of the narratives, fake narrative that apartheid state has been coming up with is not working. It's not working. Everybody knows that they are deliberately killing people. They are slitting their heads. People Israel through bombs. They've been splitting the bodies of the babies. It's a child-killing apartheid state. The scale of the Israel's terrorism, the scale of the genocide is, I would say, unprecedented in the modern history. We have not seen it after the Holocaust of the Jews in Germany. Now, same thing. I mean, Jews were the victims of the genocide and the Holocaust of the Hitler. Now, again, the people from among the Jews, known as Zionists, now they are replicating the same thing in Gaza. The question is why the West and world is so particular about Holocaust, why there have been laws that no one can even question the statistics and the credibility of the Holocaust figures. Why can't there be a legislation against another Holocaust until unless unless this culture of impunity is not eliminated from the world, I don't think there would be any peace. There has to be war, one after the other. Look at the broader picture. After Afghanistan, they have gone to the Ukraine. And then when Ukraine war theater was there, they have started off this Gaza, and then Pakistan and India. Again, you have to see these big powers, they have to sell their weapons. And the people, more particularly Muslims all over the world, they are the victims of those weapons.
Javed Rana, thank you for joining us from Islamabad. It was a pleasure having you.
The growing tide of anti-Israel sentiments. What you see behind me is just tip of the iceberg of what is happening in the country. More than half of $52 billion black CIA budget is spent on espionage network in Pakistan. How would you handle it?
The US has looked upon Pakistan as an ally at one point and then as an enemy at the same time.
That is going to be the first legal reason on the basis of which he is going to be instantly ousted by the Supreme Court of Pakistan.
Joining us live, Javed Rana, who's an expert on politics and geo-strategic issues.
In the world politics, which is not being driven by any moral principle, it is being driven by the hard geo-strategic realities. In a broader picture, more countries would aspire to have nuclear weapons.